Today we're going to be discussing the 6 games that government bureaucrats play when faced with the inevitability of budget cuts. Thank you for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan and this is We the Governed. And this is a special outdoor edition of filming that we're doing in the middle of the Wuhan coronavirus pandemic shelter-in-place orders by Washington State Governor Inslee. And as we mentioned, this is going to be discussing the fact that bureaucrats play many games when they know that they are faced with budget cuts. And Washington State, just like every state in America, is going to be faced with significant budget cuts this year, 2020, and going into the next couple years. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But today we want to discuss the games that bureaucrats tend to play when they're faced with budget cuts. So let's get right into it. Number 1. The first thing that government bureaucrats will always play, and the politicians will help them do this, is the game of denial. And this is human nature. It's to be expected, and we know that people are going to be in denial when faced with the difficulty of knowing that the department or agency that you're working for has to make difficult budget cuts. Nobody likes budget cuts, and if you're a government bureaucrat, you're not really used to that. And when you have to do genuine budget cuts, the first thing you want to do is deny it and pretend that it's not going to happen. I think that we're going to quickly get out of that phase because that isn't going to last very long. Even in the math challenge world of bureaucracy, the reality is going to face them starkly that there's going to be a lot less tax dollar money that they can play with. Number 2, the next most likely thing that I think bureaucrats are going to try to come up with, realizing that at least in our state, Washington State, that they're faced with billions of dollars in budget shortfall, is they're going to say, let's bond it. Let's take out loans because we want to live high today and make sure that our kids and our grandkids can pay for it tomorrow. Now, it's true that Washington State has a rainy day fund. There's over $1.2 billion in that rainy day fund, and this budget shortfall is going to be so significant, and the tax receipts are they're collapsing so quickly that the reality is the rainy day fund is gone. Now, the second thing they're going to say is there's going to be grants from the feds. That's true, there will be some grants from the feds. It will not be enough. So they're going to jump in and say, listen, let's look at other sources of free money, because a bureaucrat's going to view the rainy day fund as free money. They're going to view these federal grants as free money. And then they're going to view loans as free money, because why not live large today and make somebody else pay for it tomorrow? So that's going to be the next thing they do. Now, that is a bad thing to do from a budget standpoint, because if you're bonding for something that is, you're basically going into debt, getting out the credit card, just to run operations for some period of time, and then making your kids and your grandkids pay for it in the future, there's nothing moral about that, there's nothing good about that, and that is a terrible choice to make. And yet, I expect that there's going to be a variety of legislators that come up with that idea. Number 3. The third thing that I guarantee bureaucrats are going to do, and you're already hearing a little bit of this rumbling around the state and rumbling elsewhere, is taxes. The taxpayer is always the default position. Rather than cut even a dime from your budget, the best thing you can do is go and take as much money as you can from the taxpayers. That's the way bureaucrats view this. It's the way they've always viewed it. That's the way they're going to view it this time. I think they're going to have some difficulty because the appetite for people to pay higher taxes is going to be substantially lower. It's going to be substantially lower because millions of people are going on unemployment, lots of small businesses are going under. That's the very reason that we have a collapse in tax receipts right now. So the ability to raise more mystery taxes on somebody out there is going to be very unlikely. I think that appetite's very low. And I think the politicians that push it are basically going to see their political futures shortened by the strength of trying to push this tax increase. And yet they cannot help themselves. I guarantee that's going to be one of the plans that they toss out there. In Washington State, we don't have a state income tax. So, inevitably, this is going to be raised just like it's been raised since the 1930s. They're going to try to see if they can shove an income tax down the throats of Washington State taxpayers. That has been rejected by the voters every time in recent years. For the last nearly 100 years, it's been rejected every time. I don't think the voters of Washington State would support that. I'm sure the politicians and bureaucrats, certain politicians and bureaucrats would love that, but the reality is it's probably not going to happen. But I guarantee that's going to be one of the games they're going to want to play. Let's see if we can just get more tax dollars. Number 4, and this is where bureaucrats get tricky. They're going to do what I call harmful cuts. This is punish the people. This is the Punish the People program, and what I mean by that is that whenever the budget's going to be cut, and you can see this in municipalities and states all around the country, every time the budget's going to be cut, what's the first thing that they try to cut? They try to cut the bureaucrats. They don't go and cut their own salaries. They don't decrease their bureaucracy. They don't do programmatic cuts where they eliminate programs that are failing or not working well. No, the first thing they're going to try to cut is they're going to try to cut something that actually hurts the people who live there. For example, in Washington State, they'll decide that they need to release these criminals, violent criminals and offenders and sex offenders. Let's release them into the population. And they'll say it's because we don't have enough money to keep them in jail. But what they're really doing is they want to release them in the population, and then they'll commit more crimes, and you'll have these horrible crimes committed, and they'll say, see, that's what happens when you cut our budget. You better give us a lot more money, and they'll wait until they can rack up enough crimes in the community to convince the people to raise taxes, or that they need to raise taxes or do in some other way support those bureaucrats. Now, the other thing that they'll do is they'll shut down services that people actually use. The majority of services, I argue, frequently aren't used much by the average people in Washington State, by the majority of people in Washington State. So Puget Sound Partnership, a useless agency, they don't want to cut that. Department of Ecology, another agency that spends a lot of its time hurting people in Washington State, you won't see them trying to cut that. Evergreen State College, the national joke of a college, with collapsing enrollment and a lot of overpaid, high-paid upper management that nobody needs. They won't try to cut that first. They're going to try to do things like cut parks. People actually use parks. People like going to parks. People like camping at parks. They're going to try to cut those. You saw this with the federal government shutdown, where they would do anything and everything they could, even if it cost them more money, and they had to go way out of their way to try to deny access to parks, even parks that have no maintenance on them and limited services in the first place. They will spend more money and energy to cut those parks or cut access to those parks so that the average person doesn't have access to them. This is punish the people. This is a strategy that bureaucrats have used for a long time, and they've basically relied on the fact that most people really don't have any idea how government's spending money and what they spend it on. And so the bureaucrats will rely on the fact that people will only see the handful of services that they actually use being cut, and they'll think, oh my God, there's too many cuts coming. So that's the Punish the People program. I guarantee that that's going to be part of the effort that you see bureaucrats, the games they're going to play to try to make and avoid cutting positions, especially where they work. Now, number 5, this is a little trickier, but this is another game that they play, and that's the across-the-boards cut. You saw Governor Gregoire in Washington State do this in the past. It's been done before. It's done not infrequently. And that's based on the fallacy that every government program is equal to every other government program. And therefore, if we do have a budget drop of 5, 10, or 15%, that we'll just do an across-the-board cut because everybody's equal. And that isn't true when it comes to government programs. Everybody's equal personally, but the programs sure as heck aren't. Some of the examples I've already referenced are useless programs that could be cut dramatically, and most people wouldn't be harmed or affected by that at all. Another example would be the fact that you could go into agencies that are substantially top-heavy with senior, high-paid political appointees and bureaucrats and cut those people without having to cut frontline people. But of course, those are the very people making budget cut decisions. They're not going to cut their own jobs. So what they're trying to do is find ways to justify their existence, and they're going to throw the entry-level people under the bus. The last game that they're going to try to play is basically this is where Hunger Games in bureaucracy starts to kick in. And that is they're going to start pointing out other agencies. You're going to see bureaucrats fight and trying to throw less politically connected programs or bureaucrats under the bus. And this is oftentimes happens behind the scenes, but you'll see them leak on each other, you'll see them turn each other in, you'll see them throw each other under the bus. That is probably the least harmful in a way of any of the games that bureaucrats play when budgets have to be cut. And it should help inspire what we actually need to do good budget cutting when it comes to government programs, you really have to do programmatic cuts. It means you have to go in and you have to specifically look at specific programs that you can cut and it doesn't affect the public at all. Or you can kick it, that plan or that program, even if it is a good idea, kick it down the road a decade. Or many of these are not good ideas, let's just eliminate them. Or, as I had mentioned earlier, dramatic cuts in upper management and upper management pay. But nevertheless, these are the 6 games that bureaucrats are going to play, and I encourage you to be aware of them, educate yourself more on them. I'll write an article and link it below, providing more details and examples of this. But I encourage you to be aware of this so that when the cuts come, and they are coming, you'll know and recognize some of these games that you'll hear the bureaucrats playing. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more, go to wethegovern.com. You can also look at the article linked below. And I encourage you to like and share this with others. And just remember, the future belongs to those who show up. And even in a pandemic situation like this, where we're stuck at home and not able to get out there and be engaged and active in our communities as we'd like, we still have to pay attention to what government is doing.